Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Toon. I'm the LLC's Communications Director, filling in again today for Patty Mulvihill, our Executive Director, who's traveling to Washington, D.C. actually today for the upcoming National League of Cities Conference. I want to welcome everybody to today's legislative webinar and the completion of week 7 of the 2025 legislative session. Before we start, some quick housekeeping issues. First, if you have not yet done so, please make sure your microphone is muted. And second, we will end this webinar promptly at 1 o'clock. Also, please update your screen name to include the city that you represent. I will put some instructions on how to do that in the chat. A lot of information to provide today. We'll do our best to move through it quickly. And so that allows us to take questions at the end of our presentations from our lobbyists. Now, for today's webinar, we're going to change up our format and our agenda a little bit. We're going to take you through the week's activities at the legislature using 3 different segments. So the first segment will be covering the top bills of the week. In that section, we're going to talk about 2 bills and 1 legislative concept related to housing bills, quite frankly, that have some grave consequences for cities, and these will be heard in committee coming up on Monday. Now, the second section we're calling ongoing bills. We'll discuss 3 bills there. This is about legislation that we've discussed previously, but that has generated a lot of questions, so we want to keep you up to date on those things. There, we will be talking about Senate Bill 916, which provides striking workers with unemployment benefits. We'll also be talking about transient lodging tax flexibility and water workforce operator in training legislation. Then our third segment is what we're calling emerging issues. This is new developments that are happening at the Capitol that we want to put on your radar. In that section, we'll cover transportation funding, property tax assessor funding, and an oldie but a goodie, PERS. And there is legislation that shockingly will increase financial burdens on employers. So we'll save that one for the end. That's an old strategy to keep you sticking around to hear about everything. So because of the volume of information that we need to present today, we're going to hold all questions till the end of the presentation. If you have a question at that time, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Okay. At that point, I and other staff will do our best to make sure we know who raised their hands or posed a question in the chat first. So let's begin by turning things over to Jim McCauley, who's going to take us through these sections that I described one at a time. Jim, go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you joining us again today for your weekly update on legislative work. Again, as Kevin mentioned, we've got a little bit of an expanded format today. What we've found over the last couple of sessions is we've had a number of questions come up from members, and it seemed to make some sense to build in a little bit more content to our day-to-day. So we're going to start with effectively top bills of the week, and what that really does represent is where we have action items, bills that are coming up in committee next week, and your lobby crew is identifying anything that's really important for us to be chiming in on. So with that, I'm going to bring Alexandra Ring, who's our lead on housing and homelessness issues. And it honestly seems like every week is becoming housing week with the plethora of bills that we are dealing with. And to give people kind of a quick head count, or at least a number count on how many pieces of legislation we've got in front of us right now. We have gone past 3,320 bills at this point in time. That is well beyond any kind of an average that we've had over the last several elections or legislative cycles. So with that, I'm going to have Alexander start out with Senate Bill 974. It's a housing, zoning, permitting timeline bill. So go ahead.
Thanks, Jim. And I actually have a big update that I've gotten in the last 15 minutes. Both SB 974, which is the one that I will start with, and LC 4622 have been moved to next Monday. We're taking things a little bit slower. So this may be a little bit of a slower housing week for folks, which is much of a blessing because it does seem truly like every week is housing week. So SB 974 would create a statewide requirement that cities turn around zoning and public works permitting within a certain time frame. This is, of course, a big ask for our cities and our planners and our permitting staff. As written, of course, LOC is very opposed to the bill. The bill sponsors, however, are very open to conversations about what needs to change in this bill to make it workable for our members. So we will be engaging in those conversations and negotiations next week, which now will be before the hearing. So this is all very exciting. And hopefully we'll have some better news by the end of next week about what this bill will contain for y'all.
Jim, you're muted.
Still on mute.
All right, sorry about that, folks. You'd think by now we got this figured out. So that's great, appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and let you proceed with the other two bills here. You've got an LC draft 4622 and then also House Bill 2238.
Yeah, so LC 4622 will be introduced as a bill on Monday. It was also supposed to be heard on Monday for the first time in the Senate Committee on Housing, and thankfully this one once again has been moved to next week, which is a great blessing. This one is essentially the same thing as the one I just went over, just this time for building permits. It would create a 45 calendar day clock for localities to turn around building permits. It has the same sponsors as the previous bill, Senator Anderson, who of course is a former mayor, so he's very understanding of cities' needs. We'll be engaging in negotiations next week about, what the time frame is in the bill, kind of whether or not we could include some application completeness requirements. I've heard from cities that a lot of you get building permit applications that are not complete, that folks say are complete. So a little bit more of an impetus to receive complete applications. And then under what circumstances that clock gets reset, which would be at any time there's any kind of amendment to the building permit. So we don't have to quibble about what is and isn't a minor or major amendment. So we will have more updates for you by the end of next week, and we'll have or by the end of this week, next week, and we'll have a hearing the following. And then the final one for today, HB 2238. This is a bill from the governor's office. This one's a big one. It's a major preemption of local authority. It creates a statewide approved building permits, like building plans, for single family homes, cottage clusters, plexes, and apartments between 6 and 12 units, which of course is a huge amount of work for our cities. Not all of our cities have the same needs in terms of what homes they are looking to permit and what their community needs. This would only apply to vacant lots and lots without certain overlays. So if it's in a floodplain, things like that, but it still would really reduce the amount of local control you have over what kind of housing you're permitting in what zones. And that will be heard on Wednesday now. I think that's all I've got left. Jim, sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I know we're all kind of loaded up with what we've got going on today as well as next week. So I think simple message here is obviously some updates in terms of the timing of when these bills are going to be going forward. But being able to get testimony in is still a premium ask of yours. Is that fair?
Yes, especially on HB 2238, the governor's bill. We've been having conversations, but they're not really willing to move. So y'all's testimony on exactly what this means in your community is really important.
Okay, super. Thank you for that. And again, like all of the priorities that we set out here on a weekly basis, your focal point really is the committee and being able to get testimony into that process. If you have members who are on these key committees where these bills are being heard, outreach directly to them, phone calls, emails will be incredibly helpful in this process. And then for those of you who don't have legislative members on these committees, being able to tell your own legislators to reach out to these committees, their co-chairs and vice chairs and things of that nature are going to be incredibly important going forward on this bill or anything else that we bring up in this process. That communication, again, is incredibly important for us, and it helps us leverage the advocacy that we've got going on. So we're going to shift now. Those three items and stuff were really the top line for us this morning. Obviously, we don't have control over that legislative calendar, so things happen and we get updates. So we're going to shift a little bit to really some ongoing bills, which are really some updates, but are nevertheless still very important to us for an organization in terms of what we're advocating on. So Scott Winkles, you're up first. Senate Bill 916.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I wished I had better news to report on this bill. It could be worse, so there's always that cold comfort. 916, this is the bill that would allow striking workers to obtain unemployment insurance benefits. League remains opposed to this legislation. The bill was heard again this week. The League offered additional testimony, and there was some amendments. So the bill will now require a 2-week waiting period for most employees before they're able to go collect UI insurance. They'd have to be on strike for 2 weeks in most instances. When I say most, because if you're an employee who's already been on unemployment in that year, they waive the first week. So if they've already been on unemployment, they go out on strike, then they would only wait the 1 week. I don't know how often that would occur. We do have significant concerns about this bill. I think we've had a collective bargaining system for public employees in this state for better part of 35 years that's designed to keep people negotiating in good faith and at the table and in a way that avoids a strike. And that does that by making sure everybody has risk going into those negotiations. I think this bill mitigates that risk. I think it also backs in public employers into a corner when going into the bargaining unit. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out. Adding chaos at a time like this to collective bargaining is probably not in the public interest. I think this bill is potentially quite damaging for public services in Oregon. I appreciate every city leader out there who reached out to their legislator. It's going to the Senate floor. We are asking you to continue that pressure, but expand your contacts into the House of Representatives as well, as we don't anticipate being able to stop it on the Senate floor at this time. I mean, it's possible, but I think unlikely. So that's where we are on this legislation. Again, thank you to everybody who reached out to their senators and asked for that no vote. That's where we're at. The League did, and the Legislative Committee did authorize the lobby team to offer a 3-week waiting period instead. We felt that was, given the risks associated, mitigating. They didn't go that route, and so they're sticking at 2 weeks. My sense of it is that they couldn't get that bill out of the chamber at a 1-week waiting period. So that's where we're at.
Scott, thanks very much for that. So again, not a great outcome with where we're at right now. I think we still are opposing, as well as many of the other coalition members at this point in time.
Yeah, none of the employer groups are peeling off. We're all both publics and private employer interests.
Okay. So does it still make sense for folks to, I'll just say, keep the heat up and
yeah, I think you keep that heat up, or reach out to your senators again, reinforce that message, and then we'll expand that outreach to your House members too.
Okay, super. Thanks very much for that. Let's shift a little bit of a gear to a different subject area. This is one of our priority bills this session, and this is House Bill 3556, transient lodging tax flexibility. Go ahead, Jenna.
Yeah, this has come up on pretty much every one of our calls, so just wanted to give an update that House Bill 3556 is tentatively scheduled for a public hearing on March 20th in the House Committee on Emergency Management, General Government, and Veterans. And so I'm telling you all this now. It's not in the bulletin on purpose because we don't want our good friends at the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association to have more time to plan. But I put a one-pager in the chat, and if you would like to use it to start writing testimony, I would encourage you. If you want to add your logo to our one-pager, feel free to send that to me. And when the bill officially gets scheduled, which will likely be sometime late next week, you'll see a bulletin article, because then at that point it will be completely public. We don't know right now how big or long the public hearing will be. We are hearing that the primary reason is to do a public hearing and then a possible work session to move the bill to the House Revenue Committee where we want it to be. So stay tuned. Right now, written testimony will be better than spoken testimony. So if it's a priority for your city, start writing, and I'm happy to help and provide any information you need.
Great. Thanks very much. So just a general question on this. I'm assuming it's fair to say that members should be reaching out to legislators, making sure that they understand what TLT is about, making sure they understand what our concerns are, as well as what our solution is.
Yeah, I would say focus on the folks on emergency management, general government, and veterans first, but also the House Revenue members. I said this last week in my update. I sent an email to all city managers who have a city that has a local lodging tax with a request to reach out to those folks. So I know a lot of people have been doing that groundwork. So keep up the good work. But I think now the time is going a little bit further than just informing people what the TLT is and why we want it, but starting to really write those thoughts down and be ready to put them on the record.
Yeah, super. Appreciate that additional, Jenna. So I'm going to get Michael Martin on here so he can give you an update on House Bill 3634. This too is part of the, I'll just say, overall set of priorities that we've got this session. So Michael, take it away with House Bill 3634.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. Earlier this week, we had a hearing on our operator and training water workforce priority. This would basically add $5.5 million ultimate goal available to cities to train drinking water and wastewater operators. We all know that there's a significant shortage. There's going to be a lot of retirements over the next 10 years. So this is really a proactive step. We were really grateful the Water Caucus co-chairs actually introduced this bill during the hearing in in Higher Education and Workforce Development House Committee. And it is a priority of theirs as well. So that's really good. And just want to say a little note, everybody who submitted letters, thank you so much. I actually heard from several legislators, particular folks with representatives on the committee, that those letters were really helpful. So you will have another opportunity to provide letters, and just want to underscore that point that Jim made earlier, like your engagement and reaching out to your legislators, whether or not they're on the committee or not, is really helpful. So we expect there'll be some amendments, some friendly amendments that would high level add community colleges to the mix, but we're thinking this bill is going to continue to go forward. So thanks everybody for your help and support.
Yeah, super. Thanks very much for that, Michael. So overall, hearing went well. It's always helpful to have something that the Water Caucus has selected as a priority. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, that is a really helpful. It's as a reminder, it's the only bipartisan co-chaired committee in the state legislature. So they put forth a lot of work. Actually, they just sent out an update, and this operator and training water workforce piece is on there. So it's really helpful to have that support. And again, just to continue to underscore, those letters to your legislators really help. There's a lot of testimony submitted on the record for this. So really good. Appreciate it.
Okay, super. So the last section here that we've got with the format today really just is kind of about emerging issues, stuff that we see coming up on the horizon. It also it gives us a chance to maybe highlight some survey work that needs to be done going out the door. So right now, and in the bulletin, and basically all city managers will be getting a targeted email here before the end of the day for me, and that's a member survey on transportation funding tools. So some of you have submitted information in the past, data for different reasons and things of that nature, but this issue came out of Joint Committee on Transportation here a week or so ago. A couple of the committee members are interested in learning a little bit more about how many cities are utilizing things like the utility tax or utility fee structure out there to help supplement what you're not getting from other revenue sources for transportation. So it's in the bulletin. It's a Qualtrics survey. I'm hoping to get as many cities to respond to that by the 17th is my timeline. And like everything else that we put out during legislative session, this information can be incredibly helpful to help frame some of the issues that we're working on. And transportation package this year is truly remains a priority. ODOT's been going through, I'll just say, a rough spell, trying to explain a $1 billion accounting error. So credibility is at a premium at this point in time with how we're going to try to frame this transportation package for the remainder of this session. So, like I said, city managers will get a survey request here before the end of the day. We wanted to make sure it was also duplicated in the bulletin so you can find this, again, member survey and the transportation funding tools there. Jenna, I'm going to bring you back in for property tax assessor funding bill. This is 3518.
Yeah, House Bill 3518 is a bill coming from the county assessors and our friends at the Association of Morgan County. It's a really high priority for them. For those who don't know, the counties are the ones who evaluate property for property tax and then distribute the revenues back to every district. So in around the late 80s, prior to Measure 5 and 50, the legislature created something called the CAFA, or the County Assessment Function Funding Assistance Program, and that is a grant program that assists counties with additional funding for assessment and taxation, and it primarily comes from document recording fees and then a percentage of the interest that is collected on delinquent property tax revenues. And so over the years, that funding has gone down. I don't think this is surprising to anyone because cities also have this issue, right? The property tax system does not grow more than 3% every year. And so counties are proposing a bill. What 3518 would do is that it would increase the document recording fee that has never been increased to inflation to $19 and then tie it to a CPI index so it grows for the future. The second part that it would do is that it would stop going off of the percentage of delinquent tax interest revenue to cities, and it would take a cut just off the top of every taxing district to the tune of like 0.3%. And so what that netted impact to cities would be $1.7 million a year. And then the last thing that it would do is ask the state to fund $10 million a biennium for county assessment function. This bill has come back in different iterations in different sessions. It at one point was a 3% ask that was way more than what the counties needed. So they've tried to right size it. Part of their thought process is that if they have better assessment, they can increase revenue by catching property that's not necessarily on the tax roll or is valued at a higher price. So I will say this bill is having its first public hearing in House Revenue on Tuesday. The House Revenue Committee is not subject to legislative deadlines. So this is the first of many conversations, one that will likely be negotiated throughout most of session. I've heard from a handful of cities who don't like this concept. I've heard from a couple of cities who are supportive of this concept because in talking with their local county assessor, they have found that there will be some return on investment, that if they give up a little bit of the 0.3% off the top to their county assessor, they are likely going to get more in revenue just based on how much their city has grown and all of the new properties that aren't necessarily valued correctly. This is going to be a challenging space for the league. We want to be good partners and negotiate in good faith, but my current leaning is that if the counties need funding, that this should all be included in a larger property tax reform conversation and be part of a deal that we make to better the system as a whole. So that's where we're at right now. I will be taking this to LOC's legislative committee to have a bigger conversation about where LOC should be positioned. But like I said, there are cities who support it and cities who don't support it right now. And so we are just trying to be cognizant of what does that really mean. And we are waiting for the assessors to get back with us with more statewide impact about what they think that their return on investment will be. And we'll share that with you when we have it.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Jenna. So final piece here is a quick little heads up on some PERS health insurance. This is Senate Bill 874. Scott, you are PERS, so I'll bring you back in.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm full of good news today. This week we heard testimony on a bill scheduled by bill number Jim referenced. What it would do would increase the subsidy that employers pay for retirees who use the PERS health insurance plan. PERS houses two health insurance options. One is it's called the RIPA plan, and the other is RIA. RIPA is for state employees. The RIA is for everybody else. They want to increase the subsidy we're paying per employee per month, from $60 to $100. It would represent an increased cost. The increase by itself is not huge, but here's the concern that we have is we're seeing a lot of bills introduced this session that do a little PERS increase every year. And we saw last session with the passage of Senate Bill or House Bill 4045, which created a new category of PERS employee for hazardous conditions, employees in hazardous conditions, that we saw an increase for all employers and a huge increase for employers who have dispatchers or emergency telecommunicators, as well as the state hospital. And so it's this consistent rolling back of those reforms that's leading us to, it's causing additional expenditures on cities. And then all of this is taking place in a backdrop of an earnings picture for the PERS fund where we're not making earnings. We're just not, the fund is not hitting the assumed rate. So if the fund doesn't make 6.9% earnings, then employers can expect an increase, and we've been missing that mark for market volatility and interest rates and a bunch of other reasons. And so the bill right now, it had a hearing, it's going to work session. I think it's just getting moved to Ways and Means. So we don't expect it to be on the floor, but I think when you're talking to your legislators and if you're having these regular conversations with them, we're not quite ready to send out an alert on this yet, but mentioning this issue with them would be really helpful so they understand the situation. I think the system-wide average increase for PERS starting in July 1 is about 4.08% of payroll going into the next fiscal year. No, it's the system-wide average. No employer actually gets that exact number, but that's the situation we're in. Some recognition that this is unsustainable, and it's probably driving us to another PERS reform package if the legislature doesn't reverse course. That's where we're at. So But I did not send this in with my list, so sorry, Jim and Kevin, but 179 headed rec community headed to the Senate floor. We're in good shape.
Okay, way to go. Finish up with a positive item that we've been after, obviously, for years. And this, again,
Yeah.
179 is, I'll just say, a more permanent fix to the temporary work that you were able, and the coalition was able to get done in 24.
Exactly.
Okay, fabulous. So, Kevin, we've made it
Yes.
through the agenda, and
All
it
right.
looks like there are several questions.
We do have a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
So before we dive into responding to questions, I do want to bring Michael Martin back. Again, we embrace opportunities to pass along wins for cities, and you'll see in today's bulletin there's an article about a U.S. Supreme Court decision related to the Clean Water Act. I wanted to have Michael fill you in on that.
Yeah, and Scott, this might be a bookend. So some good news, and like Kevin said, a win for cities. So the Supreme Court of the United States just ruled in the city and county of San Francisco versus the Environmental Protection Agency. And effectively what was EPA's very vague rules that about cause, the two words here, cause and contribute, and that those were really vague when it came to our clean water utilities, like our wastewater utilities. And so that case had been going on for 4 years. And so they ruled in favor of the city and county of San Francisco, really that there has to be clear guidelines in terms of what clean water requirements are being asked so that our utilities can actually meet that. I will say we're going to watch this closely, how this impacts DEQ and here in Oregon. But overall, that is a win for cities because there needs to be clear guidelines about what we're required to do to fulfill our obligations under the Clean Water Act. So that's it.
Thank you, Michael. I'll put a link to that article in the chat. So now let's pivot to Q&A. Two procedural items to cover. If you want to just raise your hand to ask a question, please do so. We're going to start with what has transpired in the chat, and I'm just going to go according to what's coming down in the chat by timestamp. So I saw first a question from Mayor Rod Cross of Toledo about permitting, and I just want to make sure we got that one answered. I can't tell from what's in the chat if we got that answered or not. Alexandra just popped on, so I think she can clarify.
So both the permitting and the zoning / public works bill would apply to both cities and counties. So anyone who is issuing permits or public works, things like that, it applies to.
Okay, very good. Thank you for clarifying that. Looks like Rod actually raised his hand, so maybe he wants to ask a follow-up. Mayor Cross?
Yeah, real quick. So Alexandra, I have to tell you that I completely understand where Senator Anderson is coming from because Lincoln County, and they're not going to like me saying this, but they run 4 to 5 months in doing permits for buildings. And so this is going to be a heavy lift on somebody. And I got a feeling it's going to end up coming back on us.
Yeah, we're trying to mitigate the effects of this one. I think you have hit the nail on the head there in terms of where Senator Anderson is looking with his particular bill. This one has some momentum, so we're trying to kind of mitigate some of the worst effects and the worst lifts and see if we can make this into a workable thing. If not, we'll maintain our position as opposed.
I'll have a chat with him.
Of course.
Thank you both on that one. Jim, I'm going to pivot to you on this one that I'm seeing in the chat. I think it's a more of a global question from the city of Madras. And I don't know that we can actually address this bill for bill, but I thought you might have some perspective on this, asking about whether we can provide perspective on whether the bills we're sharing have a chance to pass or die. And I think maybe that's a broader conversation, but it might be good to illuminate our ability to do that at this stage in the legislative process.
No, it's thanks, Kevin. I appreciate the question from Madras. So I think what we try to do for each of these calls is to give you a sense on where bills are at in terms of whether or not they're passing or they're on their last legs. And also, obviously, where our advocacy is at. Are we supporting a bill or opposing it? And hopefully, what we're able to articulate here is a sense of some reality, but also trying to heighten the importance of your outreach and your own grassroots advocacy, because your messages and your ability to communicate with other elected officials who should be listening to their local Main Street officials, that's really kind of where the focus is, and that's really why we try to highlight these bills. So I don't think we've got a particular Ouija board that we're able to put together on a Friday and give you a sense on exactly where the votes are at on some of these things. I mean, if we want to use something like Senate Bill 916 that Scott Winkles has shared an update on, you know, it obviously made it out of committee. It was hard fought. That fight's not over. So there's still going to be a fight as it moves through the legislative process. And that's why when we ask you to stay engaged on something like that, Bill, we want you to stay engaged. Don't take your foot off the gas pedal effectively. And there are any number of other bills out there, same type of thing, that we want you to keep the gas on. We want you to make sure that you are maintaining that advocacy throughout the process, either until the bills move and we're successful, or the bills stop and we're also successful. Sometimes we'll get a call from a legislator and say, God, could you please stop people from calling us? If that's the type of phone call we get out of this process, we know we're doing our jobs, and we know you're doing your jobs in terms of grassroots advocacy.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Hope it provided some perspective for not only our members from Madras, but for all of our members that are on the call. I'm going to move now to, looks like this one might be from the city of Lafayette, and it's referencing Senate Bill 49-1. It looks like that's you, Alexandra. And they have I actually don't know if there's a question in the chat from you, Brandon. If you, it looks like you're just asking if you can ask a question. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask, we can take your question.
He also messaged me about it separately.
Okay. All right.
I'm happy to provide an update on Senate Bill 47 and to clear up some misinformation, which seems to be kind of where this question stems from. It has to do with the provisions of the bill and what their impacts are on local control. SB 49 contains 6 different provisions, and kind of they all have ranging impacts of what they're doing, from, you know, being very, you know, having a heavy effect on local control to things that, you know, are more just bad policy changes. Happy to provide more of a layout to folks who are interested. There's a lot of misinformation out there about this one in particular, folks, and kind of the effect that it would have on housing production and what exactly it does. So that's what I got for you.
Okay.
Is it fair to say, Alexander, if anybody's got a question about a housing bill, or
Yes.
honestly anything that's in our portfolios that we cover, your best source of up-to-date information is whoever that portfolio manager is. And in your case, you're going to know the ins and outs of 49 more than probably anybody else out there.
That's correct. And I'm happy to chat with folks about it. So my email is somewhere in the chat. I can put it in the chat again because I know it's probably buried at this point, but always happy to chat with folks.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm just going to continue to scroll down. Looks like we were also looking, there was a request, Alexandra, for some sample testimony to send in on 2238.
I will get that out to folks. Reach out if you're interested. Once again, I will put my information in the chat, and I'll also send it out to the housing interested city people list that we maintain.
Okay. Continuing to scroll here. just bear with me here. Lots of activity in the chat.
Kevin, I've actually got
Jim,
one that
3031,
came in
yeah. Is that,
I
is that-
got, yeah, well, actually, that's an additional one, but I'm going to take one that I got
okay,
directly and stuff. So House Bill 3666, so 3666. It's a wildfire bill related to essentially a requirement for how the utilities put together. I'll just say effectively their wildfire plans, their wildfire safety and things of that nature. This bill's been pushed into judiciary. That was all prearranged. So the bill itself is going to be going through judiciary committee here as it goes forward in the process. I honestly have not had a chance to take a deep dive into it, but I'll just say in general, looking at it and understanding kind of where some of the support's coming from, I think a lot of it makes a lot of sense for folks to get behind and support. We obviously know we're going to have any number of different challenges with wildland fire in the future. And we've talked about it a couple of times in the past about the difficulty of trying to get additional funding for Department of Forestry as well as State Fire Marshal's office. But we're going to continue to work on that. And again, I think this bill from a policy standpoint and its focus on making sure that utilities are producing plans for dealing with wildfire safety and stuff will be pretty important.
okay. And the other bill that was asked about in the chat, 3031.
Yes, 3031. So again, something that we are continuing to work on and to try to get some additional details on how that's going to be rolled out. We've submitted some additional I'll say recommendations into the process. We're working with the governor's office on this bill. And hopefully we'll find out here within the next week and stuff where some of that communication sits as we're going forward in the process.
Okay, Jim, quickly though, what is the legislation? Give us a top end of explanation of what it covers.
The top end, goodness.
What's the name of the bill besides just the number?
Basically, this is the Infrastructure Finance Authority.
Gotcha.
So this effectively is going to be the framework for how the state participates in continued infrastructure funding down the road. For those of you that may not recall, we were really successful in the 24 session, getting roughly $100 million targeted to on the ground infrastructure projects that were connected to housing. The governor wants to move towards a more programmatic structure, and that's really where this House Bill 3031 comes in. So what we're effectively working on is to make sure that whatever moves through in this legislative process creates a framework where it makes sense and cities will participate and they will be able to find some projects that qualify for this. It's critically important that we get it right, because this could potentially set us up with literally $100 million allocation every year for the foreseeable future to help out with infrastructure. And that is incredibly critical because the state historically has not participated in that local infrastructure funding. That's always been left up to local governments, and that's what system development charges are for. But this could go an awful long way for us and helping out get some generational investments. And I'm going to have a quick little update here too in the relation. So anybody who had a bill or had, a project that was funded in Senate Bill 1530 from the 2024 session, as well as House Bill 4134, there were 8 cities that had projects in there that required, I'll just say, some Scribner adjustments in terms of how the project was described in legislation versus what it looks like on the ground. And there were a couple of, I'll just say, elements here that were missing in 8 of these projects. So all of those fixes for those projects moved out of Capital Construction Subcommittee this morning. It is part of an omnibus bill that's going to be moving through the process, and with any luck will be signed by the governor first week of April. And none of those cities will lose out on this next year's construction season. So didn't get a chance really to stick that into the mix and stuff today as part of our agenda, but I think it's all connected to being real helpful for a lot of cities that were fortunate to get some of that funding going forward. Knew they had fixes, and we got that taken care of.
Very good. Thank you for that late breaking news. That's going to wrap up our Q&A portion. I do not see additional messages in the chat. I don't see anyone raising their hands. So we're going to get out on time, as they say, and be done before 1 o'clock. Just two quick reminders as we wrap it up for the week. We'll be back again next Friday at noon. Jim and Patty Mulvihill actually will be in the interim traveling to Washington, D.C. for the NLC Congressional Cities Conference. So we could have some interesting information coming back on the federal level. And one last plug, if you have not yet registered for the LLC Spring Conference, got the latest registration numbers now. We're up to 235 attendees. If you are interested at all in attending, I would get registered ASAP because this event is going to sell out. That's May 1st and 2nd in North Bend. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And on behalf of our legislative team, I want to thank you for all you do for your communities and wish you a great weekend. And we'll see you next week.